First Nation Voices, NBE3C. This is grade 11 English, college level, and this is Jillian Percy. Today is class 29, and we are on question 44. My apologies for the delay. We had a little bit of technical difficulties over here, but it's all straightened out now. All right, our ways to contact. If you want to call the studio, 1-800-465-7144. The email is jillian.percy@nnec.on.ca. My Facebook is capital G, capital P, ERCY, space, capital W, AHSA. If you send me a message there, let me know what your proper name is and what course you're in and what assignment you're asking for help with, okay? If you are wanting to listen to previous classes, they are recorded and stored on YouTube. I have a teacher channel, which is also called G Percy Wasa, and it has a playlist of the NBE3C classes. And then there is also a school channel called Wasa Distance Education YouTube channel, and that has all the classes from this year by all the teachers. Okay, my most commonly asked question is how to hand in work, so here are all the different ways. If you have a learning center in your community, you can go to the DEC, ask them to scan your work and send it to me. Hang on to your originals. You can also fax it to us if you're in Ontario, 1-800-463-7852. If you are anywhere else, 1-877-990-2023. You can scan it yourself using a scanner app on your phone and then send it to me, which I'll talk about again how to do in a minute. You can mail it to me. That is not my preference. It takes a long time and things do get lost in the mail. If you do that, make sure you only mail me your copies, not your originals. If you use Google Docs to write your documents, you can share it with me through Google Docs. Make sure to include me as somebody who can view it or edit it so I can actually see it, otherwise it won't work. And you can hand in assignments by photograph through Facebook or email. Now, I am sure that photograph and scans sound almost the same, but they really aren't. The photographs are just not as good a quality as the scanner app can produce because they're really intended for pictures, right? The fine detail that you have for writing just requires kind of a little bit of higher quality. However, if you absolutely have to take photographs, make sure they're clear and not blurry so that I can read it. Your work should be either written in pen or typed so it's dark enough to read. Make sure the lighting is okay. If you have like a weird shadow on there or like a weird light spot, it can kind of wash out the writing so I can't see it. Don't just click on the share button because it will come up at a very odd size on my computer, and don't cut and paste it and put it in the email. Instead, save it as a file and then attach it to the email and send me the email. Whenever you hand in work, always send it to studentwork@nnec.on.ca. You can include me in the email if you want to be safe. When you do this, the secretary can log that you submitted the work. We can also retrieve it later if there is a problem, right? And if another teacher took over this course, or you wanted to take it again next year and a new teacher was assigned the course, then we can always access it. Whether if you only send it to me and something happened to me, no one else could ever see it, right? Always include right on the page your full name, the course name, the assignment number, and the name. And the reason I say full name is we have sometimes got like students who have very similar names, like Rachel and Rochelle, or even two people that have the first and last names that are the same, but their middle name is different. So please make sure you tell us your full name and what assignment you're doing. Some assignments have very similar names, like journal number 3 and journal 13 can look pretty similar, so make sure you label it. If an assignment asks for a rough and a good draft, please label which one is which and include them both in the same email. Okay. So I always use Adobe Scanner. It's free, it's really reliable. You download it into your phone. When you want to use it, you open it, and you just end up taking a picture like you would normally. It just does a much higher quality. You can also kind of play around with the borders to make sure you don't get your table, you just get your document. And then you keep repeating, taking over the pictures for each page in your assignment. When you're all finished, you hit continue. Then it'll let you look through and make sure all the photos are nice and clear, and reorder things. If you're happy with it, hit save PDF. Give it a name like, NBE3C assignment 14, and then save it either into your Google Drive, your Dropbox, your phone, wherever you save your things. Write me a little email and send it along to me, okay? We are in our last week of the course. Today is Wednesday. Hopefully we will get to be able to do a course on Thursday and Friday. That's my goal. Sometimes things happen though, so we'll see how it all goes. Um, as I've mentioned several times, this is a new course to me. I have definitely made some changes from the course that existed at the beginning of the year. So some of the numbers and the assignments will not look exactly the same. Some of that is because some of the web links are broken and no longer work. So I had to change the assignments because what we were originally doing just was no longer available on the internet. All right, we are on Unit 4, Reading, Research, and Reflection, and today is the last bit of Lesson 18, hopefully, if we get through everything. All right, so we are talking about research skills. The goal of the lesson is to teach the various steps to use when researching a topic and for students to begin planning out their research project. Your task for this lesson will be to create a research report on a topic of your choosing relating to Indigenous people, and some possible topics will be suggested. Okay, so the research report is a factual, objective piece of writing for the most part. There is some room for personal opinion, but generally it's intended to communicate information that you've researched. The most effective way to organize research is by using headings, or what sometimes we think of as subheadings. They will help to give your report structure and allow the reader to easily understand what you're writing about. Consider a report that someone might write about grizzly bears. That's their big topic. But you might want some subheadings, maybe habitats, life cycle, physical needs and abilities. For our report today, you're going to have to create 3 headings. The original said 5. I think that's too much for grade 11, so I'm saying 3. While the length of information under heading might vary a little bit, you should aim to have at least 1 page per heading. You're welcome to have more. You need to have a minimum of 2 sources for each heading. In other words, you researched it from 2 different sources, and you will need at least 6 different sources for the entire report. So before we start, you always develop a research plan, and that gives you direction to work towards. Also, it kind of ensures that the notes you're taking will ultimately prove useful. Otherwise, you could end up reading and writing notes on stuff that you end up not using. Whereas if you kind of narrow down what you're going to write about ahead of time, it just works a lot better. So before you even begin, you want to choose your topic. I strongly suggest doing a little bit of internet researching first to see what kind of resources are available on your topic. Nothing is more frustrating than choosing a topic and then discovering that there really isn't enough good information out there. Another problem can be whether the information is written at a level that is good for you. You don't want to be trying to read articles written for university professors that's full of technical jargon that makes it hard to understand. Step 1, asking questions. Once you've got your topic, ask yourself some questions about your topic. These questions should be open-ended rather than closed questions. A closed question would be, are there bears in Canada? Yes. There's not much to say there. An open-ended question would be, what kinds of bears do we have in Canada? And so then we could discuss that. It gives you a little bit more to talk about. Step 2, creating headlines. Turn those questions into potential headlines. Sorry, not headlines, headings or subheadings. Think about the grizzly bear example again. One might ask, what do grizzly bears eat? And that could become the diet heading. Or you might have several questions that you group together into one heading, like habitats. Here are some questions that I might have that I need to organize into headings. And these questions are based on if I was looking up information on a certain person, like I wanted to do research on a famous Indigenous person. Number 1, what community is this person from? Number 2, what is this person famous for? Number 3, what kind of education did they get? Number 4, what was this person's family like? Number 5, what are their most important achievements? Number 6, what were some difficulties that they overcame? Number 7, what were their parents like? Number 8, what are their spiritual beliefs? Number 9, what are some ways they influenced others? Number 10, what were their favorite activities as a child? Number 11, how did they try to raise their children differently than themselves? Number 12, who inspired them and how did that person influence them? Okay. So one possible way I could organize them is maybe I talk about their early childhood and family life. That would cover questions 1, 4, 7, and 10. I could talk about their education and their career beginnings. That would cover 3, 6, 8, and 12. And then I could talk about their influence and achievements, which would cover questions 2, 5, 9, and 11. It won't always work out exactly like the same number of questions for each heading. It just kind of worked out that way for me. Step 3, identify some sources. Create a list of potential sources of information. You don't want to become overwhelmed with resources, but you also want enough to get a well-rounded view of this topic. Your main source will probably be the internet, but you're welcome to use magazines and books if you have access to them. Step 4, begin the actual research. While you're making notes from your sources, make sure you are clearly identifying which source you are using. This will make it much easier when you start to develop the list of works cited. You can keep a list in an MS Word document or a Google document, whatever you're using, or you can print out your articles and copy the URL later into a list. Okay, so here's the official question. It's number 44. Part 1, where we're doing the brainstorming and planning, is worth 15 marks. Here are some possible topics for the report. Take a look at them and see which one might interest you. You might want to take a quick look at the internet to see if it's easy to find some information that works well for the research project before deciding on an option. Okay, so possible topics. Bill C-45 and Idle No More. Ring of Fire. Treaties, treaty rights, and their role in Indigenous self-government. Number 4, missing and murdered Aboriginal women in Canada. Number 5, Indigenous designed schools and theories of learning and curriculum. Number 6, traditional medicine and its role in modern life. Number 7, any famous Indigenous Canadian. Number 8, native language and strategies to maintain it in youth. Number 9, Standing Rock, the pipeline proposal or protest. And number 10, another topic of your own. Just make sure to check in with me first to make sure that it's a appropriate level of topic, okay? So let's say I wanted to research Ring of Fire. How would I get started on my research? One thing to point out is that different internet search engines will pull up different resources. I find that Yahoo, for example, will pull up very different choices than Microsoft Bing versus Google versus other search engines. I personally like Google generally, but you may have your favorites as well. Some of them I find will bring up a lot of ads or a lot of sponsored stuff first, which I kind of always find really annoying. Sometimes changing around what words you use as your search term are going to pull up slightly different resources as well. So I know I'm going to research Ring of Fire, and so I might just write Ring of Fire, but some other possible search terms might be Indigenous consultations on the Ring of Fire protests, Paul Revere and the Ring of Fire, Doug Ford and the Ring of Fire, 2025, like the year, and Ring of Fire. Okay, so here's one where I just put in Ring of Fire. But what happens is there's actually a lot of different topics that have the phrase Ring of Fire that aren't necessarily going to help your research project. For example, there is a Johnny Cash song. That's a phrase that is referred to as a tectonic belt of earthquakes and volcanoes. There's a part of pregnancy that is called the Ring of Fire. And finally, there is the actual mining project you're trying to do. That's why I'm saying you may need to kind of play around with your search terms to get one that brings you more relevant information, okay? Here I put Doug Ford in the Ring of Fire. Doug Ford is the provincial leader. He has had a lot to say about Ring of Fire and mining rights. So that, for example, might be some stuff that you want to read. And then Paul Revere, he's one of the leadership candidates for Prime Minister. He represents the Conservative Party, just like Doug Ford does. He has also had a lot to say about the Ring of Fire. Here is like the Conservative Party of Canada. So that would be like a government site in a sense. And then there's different videos about him doing interviews or political speeches and stuff where he talks about that as well. Here we've got Indigenous consultations on the Ring of Fire. And so we've got magazines that talk about it. We've got CBC, APTN News, York University is talking about it. the government of Canada. So it's a lot of different sources that are possible that might work for you. Again, some things might not work. Like I haven't checked out the York University one. If that was extremely science-based, like if it was written for students who were studying environmental science at a university level, that might be too hard to read. I haven't checked it out yet. But that's what I'm talking about, where I'm saying sometimes, even though it might be a good resource, it might not really work for, for a high school project, basically. Then we've got the Ring of Fire protests, and again, you've got Sierra Club Canada, CBC, Routers, APTN News. There's a lot more. I'm just kind of showing you the top. If I show everything, it gets too small to really see. So I would pick a few of those sites, read the information, see if it makes sense to you, and if it's going to answer some of your questions. It's possible that some things may come up that are, not really that important or not really what you're interested in. Also, some items might be very similar, like if there has been a recent protest, there might be 20 stories from 20 different news sites that maybe are really all very similar. So there's no point using those. Might want to pick a different point of view. Ring of Fire has been going on for a while. Some of the items you look at might be outdated and not really of use to you. Some items might be biased. In other words, people might have stereotypes. They might be coming from a certain point of view. If an issue is controversial, it can be important to look at articles from both points of view. This is an article that, an issue that environmentalists feel very different than, say, miners. Indigenous people feel very different than non-Indigenous, and even Southern people feel very differently than Northern people. So there's a lot of different points of view to look at. You don't want to just pick one point of view and only look at it from that point. So taking the time to check out the resources may also help you to generate some research questions. As you're looking at things, you might think, oh, hey, this topic of mineral rights is really important and I want to talk some more about it. So sometimes we pick a topic and then do the research. What I'm suggesting is, as you're looking at your topics, take a moment or two to research a little bit and see if it works for you. If what you pull up is all boring or too hard or just not enough information, you may want to pick another topic. And then once you've kind of settled on a topic, you're going to do a little bit more research, okay? So, basic 4 steps for planning are: think about, what are you researching? What questions do you want answered? What 3 headings can you group your questions under? And what are 2 possible sources for each heading? You try not to use the same source for more than 1 heading. At the end, we're hoping that you'll have about 6 headings, okay? Now, only you can know what topic you're going to research. Questions. One thing I wanted to address is there's a big difference between closed questions and open-ended questions. Closed questions can be answered very simply, yes or no, or a simple one-word answer like, when did this protest start? Oh, it was in April of 2023 or whatever. There's not enough there to say. So that's why you want to make sure you've got more open-ended questions. Open-ended questions are not just right or wrong, yes or no. It might call for opinions, it might call for a lot of details, or maybe there's several possible answers. So you want to lean more towards open-ended questions than closed questions. And I kind of wanted to give you some examples. So if you say, what is the Ring of Fire? That's not going to take very long to explain. But if you asked, why is the Ring of Fire so controversial? That could take quite a while to explain. What Indigenous First Nations are affected by the Ring of Fire? That's not a super long list. Again, that won't take you very long to explain. What do the different First Nations affected by the Ring of Fire want to happen in relation to rights, money, land, or other areas? That's pretty complicated. That might take several pages. Were there protests about the Ring of Fire? Yes or no? Well, yes. Okay, well that's not enough to write about, is there? What kinds of protests were there about the Ring of Fire? Who was involved in them? And did they have any effect on the government or the mining company? So you see what I mean, where you're wanting the kinds of questions that encourage you to create detailed, interesting answers. Okay, you don't want simple yes or no questions. So I created a little graphic organizer with help from a colleague. And up top, number one, tell me what you're researching, and then create a list of at least 6 up to maybe about 12 questions that you want to research answers to. Then once you've got that, organize your questions into 3 main headings, okay? Um, some headings might have only 1 or 2 questions, but others might have 3 or 4, depending on how complex the answer might be to figure out. So if I said, like, why is the Ring of Fire so controversial? That could easily take not just a page, but several pages. Whereas another one that has much shorter questions that are more easily answered, maybe I have room to answer 3 or 4 questions. So it doesn't have to be the exact same number of questions for each heading, but remember that in the final end product, you're going to want to have at least a page under one heading. So you don't want to have one heading that's a paragraph, and the other heading's 2 pages, and the other heading's 2 paragraphs. They need to be at least 1 page each, okay? So once you've got your headings figured out, try to locate some good sources that should answer the questions for your heading. Longer articles may be a better choice for this. So up here it says locate sources for your headings. Write down your heading there and then find one source. Tell me the title. What type of source is it? Is it a book? Is it a video? Is it a news article? Is it a letter to the editor? Whatever it is. Who wrote it? When was it published? And if it's online, tell me the URL where I can find it. And then you would do the same thing with a second resource. Oh, hang on a second. Why is it so important to write down all this information? Whenever you are writing an informational report, it's important to give credit to your sources. This is often called citing your sources. If you don't cite your sources, it's considered plagiarism, which is kind of a type of cheating. Also, when you're using the internet for research, it can be very easy to forget where you found the information. So it's important to write it down as you go so that you're able to find it again. So here's an example. I found this little clip. I don't have room to include the entire article. But how I would fill it in, what's my heading? This is going to be protests against the Ring of Fire. My source is Sierra Club Canada. They're the ones that wrote this thing. The title of the article is March Against the Ring of Fire, organized by Ojibwe Nation. What type of resource is this? It's an article on a website. Who were the authors? Dr. John Bacher and Danny Beaton Mohawk. The date published, it's not really super clear. In the article, it talks about September 26, 2023, so it would be right around there, but they don't give us a publishing date. And then I gave the URL, which is just the same thing as up there, okay? So that's how you would fill that out. Okay. So, hang on. Asking why the Ring of Fire is controversial is something of an opinion question. So then that kind of guides where I might want to look for sources. Maybe I want to look for opinion columns written in newspapers. Maybe I want to look at letters to the editor from Indigenous and non-Indigenous people to see what kind of issues they're bringing up. I might want to examine statements about the goals of Ring of Fire from the different stakeholders to see which each one believes. What does the mining company think? What does the federal government think? What about the provincial government? What do the affected First Nations think? What about environmental groups or any environmental reports? So looking at the question kind of gives you an idea of where you want to look for your sources. The other thing to think about is if it's an opinion one or even other information, has it changed over time? Is there any specific event that's triggered a change of opinion? Or maybe has there been some new invention or discovery or law that has changed the information, right? You may want to look at what articles say about your event when it was originally happening, and then what is it saying now? Is there a lot of similarity, or has there been a lot of change? As we talked about before, it's important to be aware of possible bias or stereotypes that may affect the information that's included in an information source. What I mean by this is, it's not necessarily that people will lie, although that does happen, but sometimes what it means is they will downplay or just not include information that doesn't reflect what they want to have happen, and they may really pump up information that is focused on what they do want to have happen. So you kind of need to be aware of that tendency in what you're looking at and make sure you're seeing more than one point of view there. So for example, a company that stands to lose money if there are environmental issues may really try to downplay or minimize what possible environmental issues may occur. A government leader who lives in an area with a lot of Indigenous voters may have a very different stance than a leader from an area with lots of non-Indigenous voters. People who might gain or lose mining jobs might have a very biased opinion about whether it's a good idea. People who have trap lines in the area may feel very differently than people whose food sources and traditions will not be affected by the project. That's what I'm saying is be aware of that bias. Don't necessarily choose a side. Try to make sure you're looking at both sides at once. You're welcome to venture an opinion, but you want to make sure people are aware that there is more than one way to look at it, right? Try to locate a variety of different types or formats of information. This is pretty important. You don't want to over-rely on only one type of information source. Try to look at a variety of formats like a news video from broadcast or internet news stations, newspaper reports, opinion columns, official statements or policy papers from the governments or from the organizations, print or video interviews with different stakeholders, magazine articles from Indigenous and non-Indigenous sources, YouTube news or opinion videos, political speeches, protest speeches, websites, or books. You kind of want to make sure you're looking more than one spot. A lot of newspaper articles, for example, may be very imitative of each other. Sometimes they get all their information from one main news source and then they just modify it a little. That's why I'm saying you want to make sure you're looking at a variety of different sources so you're not just getting the same information over and over again, okay? Okay. You also want to make sure you're getting, we talked about the bias, different points of view. Different news outlets will have a certain stance and may present the story and the facts differently. The Globe and Mail may take a very different stance than, say, the National Post or the Toronto Star. The Chronicle, which is in the north, may take a different stance than, say, Wawate News. The Northern Miner might have a pretty strong opinion on a mining project. Different broadcast media may present different points of view. APTN may look at it very differently than CBC or Global News or CTV News. Provincial governments, federal governments, and First Nation governments may all have different points of view. Like we said, even if you agree with one side more than the other in an information report, it's a good idea to at least outline the different points of view and then try to explain why they look at it differently. Okay, part 2 is when you start to take the actual notes from your report. Don't do this until you've already found all your sources and stuff, because you don't want to waste time taking all your notes from one spot that maybe you need it for a different heading, okay? There's two main types of information that you're going to use in your report. One is general information that you've paraphrased, and the second is exact quotations. So general information is when you've read something and you basically paraphrase it. You rewrite it in your own words. It's really important not to copy information word for word exactly from the original. This is considered plagiarism, which is a form of stealing or cheating. If I recognize it, I usually will not accept the project and I will ask you to do it over. Please be aware I do check on this and I have had to ask students to do projects over. So keep that in mind when you're doing stuff. Quotations. Sometimes you do want to include information that's word for word, the same as the source, and that's fine. But when you do that, make sure that you put quotation marks around the information to show that you've borrowed it directly. Having said that, you got to try and keep the number of quotations to a minimum. Like your entire report can't be a quotation. Save the quotes for when someone's exact words are memorable or very important. The majority of your report should be in your own words. Sometimes someone famous has said something and you want to make sure you get the exact quote. Other times, maybe someone's given like a really scientific explanation that you're like, I'm not really sure how I would paraphrase that, in which case maybe you do want to quote that, but you don't want to quote everything, okay? Keeping track of your notes and sources. One way to keep track of your sources is to put the name of your source on the top of the page and then only put the notes on that page from that source. That way you know, okay, everything on this page is all from that one source. Because later on when you write your stuff, you're going to have to make sure you show where you got each piece of information from, okay? They do that, they call it citing, and we create what's called an in-text citation, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Some people prefer to put their research heading at the top of their page, and then they put all their notes on the topic on that page, even if it's from different sources. Hang on a second. Okay. When you do that, you want to make your in-text citations as you go. In other words, you want to keep track as you're going, hey, this is from this place, so that you don't lose track of where you got the information from. Either way, you do want to make sure that you've got enough information to write a full page for each heading. It's possible that you might need to have a few pages of notes, like 2 pages maybe, to condense down into one full page for your final report. It depends a little bit. Some people write a lot of notes and really condense. I tend to go that way. Some people write very few notes, but then they use everything they've got. But you want to make sure you've got enough to write your report, okay? So I created a couple of note-taking pages, okay? I'm hoping this will be helpful. You can use whichever one works better for you, or you're welcome to create an organizer of your own if you want to. But whichever way you take notes, you must keep track of your sources. And the majority of your notes must be paraphrased in your own words. You cannot just cut and paste an entire article, okay? Trust me, that is usually really, really obvious when people have done that, okay? Take the time to put the notes in your own words as you go along. It will make it so much easier when you go to do your rough draft if you've done that work during your note-taking phase. So version A note-taking page has the source at the top and then spaces for your notes to go into whichever one of your 3 different headings is appropriate. Version B has the question at the top and spaces for the 2 different sources with room for notes from each one, so you can keep track of where your information came from. So let me show you what I mean. So version A, you would put your source, I've got my words here, but you would put your source there, right? Where are you getting this information from? Does anything relate to heading 1, heading 2, or heading 3? The other possibility is you'd put your heading title or your question up top, and then from one source, what are some notes you got? From the second source, what are some notes you got? When you do this, keep in mind, obviously, you don't want your second one to be exactly the same stuff as from the first, because then you're really only going to have half a page of notes. That's where I'm talking about, like, if you're looking at a protest, make sure you're not just looking at 2 news articles in the same protest, because they're not really going to be that different. We might want to look at maybe one news article on one protest and maybe a video report on a different protest in a different part of the country, okay? That's the kind of idea I mean. For each of these, you're going to have to do multiple copies. For this one, you have to do at least 3 copies. For this one, if you're using 6 sources, you'll have to use 6 copies, and you could hand this in. Like I said, you can do your own, but it needs to be really clear on the page where your information is coming from, okay? Hang on. Okay, so we're going to talk about creating citations right now. We've got about 10 minutes. We should be good. If you're writing notes from a variety of sources on one page, it's easiest to just get in the habit of using citations right away. You're going to need to include them in your rough and final copy anyways, and if you don't write it down as you're doing it, you're really unlikely to remember where the information came from. Like if you've looked at 20 different sites about Ring of Fire, it's going to be really hard to remember which exact paper you read that information from. So citations are put in parentheses or brackets at the end of a sentence. If you got the information from a book, you're also going to need to write down the page number that you saw it on. You won't need to worry about page numbers if you used a website because they're not really set into pages that same way. Here is how you would write a citation. If you're using a book, you generally would list the author's last name and then the page number in brackets, and it would look like this. It is encouraging to see how perfectly a book, even a dusty rule book, perpetuates and extends the spirit of a man. White, EB16. Okay, now they don't need the first name, just the last name. White 16. That's the guy's name, by the way. Now, if the information was paraphrased, put in your own words rather than quoted, it would still look much the same. It just wouldn't use quotes. He felt that books reflected the spirit of the man who wrote it. White 16. Okay. It doesn't need to say page 16. It's just everybody kind of knows who've been doing this. That's what it means, that it's the page, okay? And they know the white means that's the guy's last name. If you're going from a website, you can simply put the author's name of the article that you used. There's no need to write a page number from a website. So for example, let's say I said the Anishinaabe language is spoken from Manitoba to Quebec in Canada. That is by Horton. If it was an exact quote, make sure I put quotation marks around the exact words, but they wouldn't go around the author's name. One of the more unique features of Anishinaabe is a system of obviation, where a clause can contain references to more than one third person. End quote, Horton, and then the period goes after I put the guy's name. Okay? Oh, sorry, I was going to try and, there was one more thing I wanted to talk about here, and now I can't remember what it is. I've got my end of class, but there was something I wanted to talk about. So this only works because you're going to be doing a Works Cited page, which I'm just going to kind of show you really quickly now. The very last page in any research project is going to have what's called a Works Cited page. In some fields, they would call it a bibliography. It means the same thing. So for the Anishinaabe thing, I got that from the Canadian Encyclopedia. Yep. Okay. And then it talks about the Ojibwe language. Yep, here it is. Okay. Now, obviously, this guy Horton has probably written more than one thing. So it's fine for me to just use his last name in my research project. But at the end, I want to include all the information so people knew exactly where I got that information from. So I'm going to do a quick little snip here. So I've got my information, and then I'll show you how to make this look right. Hang on. Hopefully I've got what I need here. Yep, copy. Okay, hang on, guys. Sorry, okay, I'm going to put that in kind of my corner here. Yes, allow. Okay. I'm going to, all right, well, I'll put it over here for right now. Sorry. I can sometimes see things, but it won't let me do it. So here you would still want to put, let me grab some text here. You would still put the author's last name first. We always do that in official stuff. So the guy's name is Horton. Okay. Hang on. And it doesn't give his full name, it just gives R. So Horton, comma, R, capital R, period. Now, I am going to give the title of the article. Okay, so the title is Anish, and I'm worried I'm going to spell it wrong here. Hang on a second. Okay, Anishna. Okay, SHINAAABEMOWIN. Then I've got my semicolon, no, my colon, and then I say Ojibwe language. Oops, capital N. And then I put my end quote, okay, to show. Oh, I spelled that word wrong. Hang on a second. Okay. Now, I didn't spell Anishinaabe or Ojibwe wrong. It just doesn't recognize it because it's an American site. So it's not used to seeing the way we spell things. Hang on, can I let it move? Oh, okay, hang on, I'm going to get rid of that. There we go. My apologies. This is a fussy little program, but it works a little better than Google, which kept trying to like kick me off the site whenever anything happened. Okay, so then I want to put the website name, okay, which is the Canadian Encyclopedia, ENCYCLOPDI. Now, if I was printing this, like if I was handwriting this, I would underline that. But when we're using typesetting, what we normally do is we italicize it. So I would highlight it and hit the italicize button, and it just shows that that's the title, and then I put a period. If there wasn't an article title, but there often is, then I would just put the website title, okay? The publisher I think is really the encyclopedia person. When was it published? Okay, it was published December 18th, 2017. And I would put the URL, okay? And I'm going to grab the URL real quick. You don't need the HTTPS, you just need the www part, and then the rest of it, that part you can copy and save. This way, if somebody wants to find it, they can. Like if they want to check on your information, hang on. So we want that to be lined up. Sometimes, yeah, I'm just going to leave it like that. Sometimes you'll see a little indent. I don't think the indent is required, although I think it used to be. I'm not going to worry about it. And then you would usually say what day you accessed it. Okay? So accessed, let's see, April 9, 2025, and then a period again. The reason I tell why it's accessed is because they change, right? Websites change. Next year or even next month, maybe they decide, oh, we don't need this article anymore, and they take it down, and then all of a sudden nobody can find it, okay? If you tell me when it's accessed, I can kind of look around and see. I could use the Wayback Machine if it was really important to me. So that is how I do my Works Cited page. You're going to have at least 6 sources. You're welcome to have more if you want to, and you'll put it in order alphabetically. So if I had another guy named Abbott, he would go first. If I had someone named Zeppler, Zeppler would be last. I look at the last name. Now, not every single website will tell you who wrote it. A lot of news articles will. It may not be at the top either. Sometimes it might be at the very bottom of the article. If you can find out who wrote it, though, it is considered appropriate to include it and make sure that person gets credit. But this is why, because Horton probably wrote a whole bunch of articles. And if I had to quote more than one of his articles, I would need to look up the exact way to print that. Let me just kind of show you something. I've got just time. There's a special site called Owl Purdue. Okay, I use this site all the time. This is kind of the go-to site for learning how to use MLA format, which is what we're doing. And if you go here, so research and citations, they'll give you all sorts of information about how to do citations. And if you aren't sure, they'll even have like a little citation resource. You can put it right in there, and they will help you figure out how to cite it properly, okay? Because there are all sorts of weird things like how you cite a play is different than how you'd cite the Bible, which is different than how you might cite a film. I don't want to make it like too long because most people are probably just doing very simple stuff. But if you're not sure and you've got something unusual that you're citing, go here and check things out. Make sense? Okay, we will be talking a little bit more about the research project tomorrow, but this should be enough to get you started. If you have any questions, send me an email. I'd be happy to talk to you, and have a good night.